Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be for all of you stats nerds out there. I've seen a couple of other people do these videos and I honestly really enjoy them. And this is going to be my 2019 reading statistics and my 2020 reading goals. So I read 72 books in 2019, which is honestly pretty average for me. I don't think I've ever read 100 books in a year, but I usually read more than 50. It's like somewhere in that range. I don't use Goodreads to track my reading because I just don't. I don't really like the way that it tracks things. It's just not the way that I like to do it. I have instead concocted my own very elaborate Google spreadsheet that I've been using since 2015 to track all of my reading in a year. On that spreadsheet, I track the title, the author, the month that it was finished, the format that I read it in, so audiobook, physical, or ebook, the rating of the book. I use a star system because it just seems easier that way, although I'm thinking about maybe switching to grading because I've seen some other people do that, but Goodreads uses stars, and every 6 months or so, I'll like dump all of my reading into Goodreads, and you know, it's handy to have a star rating ready to go, so I don't know. For now, it's in stars. The genre that the book is in and the ethnicity of the author. And the purpose of tracking author ethnicity is because I had a reading goal this year that less than 50% of my reading would be by white authors. So because that is mostly what I use the spreadsheet to track, let's start with author ethnicity. I did manage to just barely squeak by with less than 50% white. It was 48.6% were white authors. The highest percentage after that was Asian or Asian American authors, which was 22.2%. After that was Black authors, which was 12.5%. And then, getting into the lower, I have biracial of white and Asian was actually 9.7%, which was mostly two authors, I think, maybe a third, but it was mostly Helen Huang, who writes The Kiss Quotient and The Bride Test, and I think Vivian Chen, who wrote the Noodle Shop Murder Mysteries, and I read like 4 or 5 of those this year. So then the last 7% is made up of just a mix of authors and ethnicities that I only read like 1 or 2 of, which was Latinx, biracial of Black and white, Native, and then books that had authors with multiple ethnicities. So that one I'm pretty pleased with. I don't really have plans to change that for 2020. My goal is to still just read less than 50% white authors. Maybe I could get that down a little bit because it was almost 49%. Maybe I can aim for a little bit lower, but I'm just keeping it at less than 50. So the next category that I don't really track on my spreadsheet, I might start in 2020, but I did just like a quick scan through and I looked for queer representation. I didn't really go for authors on this one because it's so hard to know, because even if an author appears to be in a heterosexual relationship, they could be queer in some way. So I just kind of left author identity out of the question and focused really on just representation in the story. And for it to count as having queer representation, it had to be a primary or very heavily featured secondary character. No, like, tertiary character coming out for 3 pages in a weird monologue situation here. Of the 72 books that I read, 12 of them had primary or heavily featured queer representation. So that counted for 16.4% of my reading, had like a major queer representation. I didn't set a goal for queer representation because I'm very much a mood reader, and so it just kind of depends on what I feel like reading. There's not a ton of books that have queer representation that are published, and not all of them I want to read, frankly. So yeah, I think that that's about fine. If I were going to put a number on a goal for 2020, it would probably be in the 20% range. The next one is, again, something that I didn't really track throughout the year. I just did a quick scan, and again, I left author identity out of the question and just focused on the representation in the books, and this was disability representation. I didn't go through and divide that up further into types of disability, physical versus mental, but 6 of the books that I read in 2019 had a significant disability representation. Again, only main character or very, very main secondary character counted. So some of these included like The Kiss Quotient and Bride Test by Helen Huang. Both of them have primary characters that have autism. There were some that had physical disabilities. Like I know I read one, City of Blades. The main character is missing a hand and she has a prosthetic, so I counted that. So yeah, I have a total of only 6, which is 8.3% of my reading. Not a ton. I would like to read at least 10% in 2020, but there's also not a ton being published, and I'm very much a mood reader, so we'll see how it goes. For form, as in how I read my books, I have developed another graph. The main way that I read books was ebook this year. It was 41.7% were ebooks, which is not surprising because most of the books that I get from the library I get in ebook form. And a lot of them also are ones that are really quick and easy to read, like all of the like cozy mysteries and romance books that I read in a year tend to come from the library. Those don't take me very long. So yeah, I'm not very surprised that that was the primary form. The second form after that was audiobook, which was 38.9%. Again, this is not surprising to me because I listen to audiobooks when I'm commuting to and from school, and so I get a lot of my reading done in audiobook form. And then way down at the bottom with 19.5% is physical books. I need this to be higher because as you guys may have noticed in my every physical book on my TBR ranked video, I have many physical books that I need to get to, and if only 20% or so of my reading is coming from physical books, that's not going to cut it. So I'm going to bump that up for 2020. My goal is to have a third of my books be in physical, a third or higher, because I need to get some physical books read. So after that we have genre. And this one was very much not surprising to me. Overwhelmingly, the majority was fantasy. It was a straight 50% of what I read in 2019 was a fantasy book. That sounds right. I read a lot of fantasy. Honestly, if anything, I was surprised that it was that low. After that was just like straight fiction. This is kind of a catch-all category. It included some of the graphic novels that I read that are just kind of like slice of life type stuff, as well as things like Homegoing, which was in my top 5 of 2019, things that I didn't really have another category for. I just labeled them as fiction. And that one was 12.5%. After that, we have classics, which were 9.7%. I don't remember everything that I counted as a classic, but I know that I read at least one Jane Austen this year. I know that I also read Beowulf and Norse mythology, so any kind of mythology type story I just count as a classic. It's another slightly mixed category. But then in fourth place is science fiction, which is only 8.3%. I don't read a ton of science fiction. Really, I mostly go for fantasy. And if something has kind of elements of both fantasy and sci-fi, I think I would usually classify it as fantasy. Tied after that is romance and mystery, which each had 7%. These ones, again, I tend to just get out of the library and read every once in a while when I want something quick and easy. And then nonfiction, comics, as in like superhero comics, and poetry, all counted for one book each. Those sort of filled out the remaining like 1 to 2% that was left after all of the other ones. Genre, I have no goals for in 2020. Again, I'm very much a mood reader, and so it's just kind of whatever I feel like reading. This one I just thought was fun to look at. And another one that is just kind of fun to look at, I don't have any goals associated with it really, is the ratings that I gave books over this year. Again, I have a handy little bar chart for you guys. I had 0 1-star ratings because I don't read books that I don't like anymore. The last time I had 1-star book ratings was when I was doing year-long reading challenges, and I would read books that I just needed to complete a challenge, and I don't do that anymore. So yeah, 0 1-star books. I only had 2 2-star books, one of which was The Refugees by Viet Thanh Nguyen. This one actually ended up in one of my worst of the decade ones because the audiobook is just atrocious. And then the other 2-star book was A Local Habitation by Seanan McGuire. They were just acting like dumbasses the entire time, and I couldn't stand it. I had 3 2.5-star books, which include The Favorite, which again was on my worst of the decade, 1,000 Beginnings and Endings, which I just really didn't like a lot of the short stories in that book, and Wicked Fox by Kat Cho, which I was really disappointed by. I don't think it's objectively that bad, but it was not what I was looking for. I do have a lot of 3-star books and 3.5-star books, and the difference between a 3-star book and a 3.5-star book is very, very minor. I had 13 3-star books and 18 3.5-star books, but really it's more that those can kind of be considered as one category, which would bring it up to a total of 31 in the 3 to 3.5-star range. A lot of the books I read are just kind of fine. Most of the mystery and romance books that I read end up usually being somewhere around a 3 and a 3.5-star kind of a rating. It basically just means it was middle of the road. It wasn't terrible, but it wasn't fantastic, and I probably won't really remember it 5 years from now. I did, however, have a lot of 4-star reads this year. I was kind of surprised by that. I had 23 4-star reads. These are books that I really, really enjoyed, but were just kept off of the 5-star rating for usually there's just one particular thing that sticks out to me, like the ending got super weird or the pacing was off, but I really enjoyed the characterization and the world. It's something like that. And then 4.5 and 5-star, again, the difference between those two is very slight. It's often just like if there's one tiny little thing that's bothering me, I'll give it a 4.5 rather than a 5. But together, those two are 13 books. I had 5, 4.5, and 8 5-star books. I'm actually pretty proud of the 8 5-star books. There have been years where I have given like 2 5-star ratings in an entire year. I really don't rate very many books 5 stars because for me, it's the highest rating that you can give, so only the best of the best should get a 5-star rating. I definitely rated a few books that I like reread this year as 5 stars, and I know that I rated at least 1 or 2 of the V.E. Schwab Darker Shade of Magic series. I rated at least 1 or 2 of those as 5 stars. So I enjoyed a lot of books this year, which is good. There were a couple categories that I didn't track in 2019 that I do want to track in 2020. Not necessarily to set a goal for them, but just because I think it's interesting. And so this year I am going to be tracking the source of how I got the books. So whether I got it from the library, borrowed it from a friend, whether it was an old purchased book, as in I purchased it before 2020, or whether it is a new purchased book, as in purchased during the year. Even though I don't have a specific number for it, but I want the majority of my books to be ones that I did not pay for this year. So those I need to be much, much higher than purchased this year. I don't have a number for that, but that's the goal. I am debating whether I want to track the author's gender identity and queer identity and disability and all that kind of thing. I think it gets really tricky because not all authors want to disclose that kind of information, and I think that that's totally fair. But it also is interesting to track because it is important to me to read diversely. So yeah, I'm not sure how to do that. So if you guys have any suggestions for how I should track that. And, if you had any goals for 2019, did you meet them? Do you have goals for 2020? I'm a big stats nerd, so let me know down in the comments. But that is going to be it for this 2019 statistics and 2020 goals. I hope you guys enjoyed it, but thank you guys for watching, and I will see you soon in another video. Bye!